All right, folks, I'm headed to the office. It says it's going to be about an hour, which is nuts because it's already 20 minutes after rush hour ends. So we'll see how that goes. But I'm going to Reddit for a little bit of a change. I've been doing a bunch of viewer asked questions. I saw this one on Reddit that I thought would be interesting about lacking ownership. And before I dive into that, just a reminder, if you want your questions answered, leave them in the comments below, or you can write me. Look for Dev Leader on social media. Dev Leader is my main YouTube channel. Check that out for more polished, edited videos. This one is going to be some rambling and some yelling at cars on the road. If you send them in, I will answer them anonymously, so you can write whatever you'd like, and I'll try to just use the information and generalize it. But with that said, we'll get into lacking ownership. And so this person writes, my team has this one feature that we cannot seem to successfully deliver due to consistent failures or regressions and mandatory dependencies. Folks more senior than me have tried and failed. Now this feature has been handed to me. Dun dun dun. Okay, I'm really not happy about having to own this feature, but ever since coming to me, my manager is insisting I show total ownership and get it done. I've gotten probably 75% of the way there, but the last 25% is really complex. In fact, none of our tech leads can actually provide me a sound path forward. Recently, my manager has said that I lack ownership because I said it might be almost done. Then a month later, it wasn't done for reasons outside of my control. So they mentioned dependencies having major regressions. How to handle this type of thing. Okay, so this is something that becomes a lot more important in terms of advancing in your career. So it's not that ownership is never important, but being able to demonstrate it becomes more and more important. Reliability, accountability, ownership, these are all similar types of words. Um, and when I was thinking about how I wanted to kind of navigate this, because this is a topic I looked at, like, I literally got into my car and then opened up Reddit and was like, this will be an interesting one. I don't do a lot of prep for these, so it's really just stream of consciousness. I was thinking that I wanted to share an example of mine, even from being at Microsoft. So it's quite recent. Well, within the last 5 years, kind of recent, I guess, where I I have an example where I feel like I was not taking ownership and then really had to turn it around. So I wanted to start by talking through that, and I won't share the actual details of the project because I mean, number one, it doesn't really matter. Number two, it's private. It's confidential. So the scenario though was that I was working on a very large project that was sort of across many teams in the organization, and so every team has their own part to play. And I remember, like, projects already ongoing and I come into it, right? So this is an existing project, lots of people working on it, and now my team has a role to play, and I'm going to be working on this and helping coordinate our part. Now, at the time, I had a project manager that was very new to the team, experienced project manager, but new to the team. So one of the things that's tricky in a situation like this is, like, in terms of domain knowledge, I'm relatively new, certainly new to the project, so I have a lot to learn, but they're also not only new to the project, but new to our team. So the good news is, because they're an experienced project manager, like, it's not like they're just navigating how to do their job in general. They're good at their job, which is awesome. This is good news. I like to think, as an engineering manager, I'm good at my job. Okay, this is good news. But what we're lacking is, like, number one, the project domain knowledge, and then we have one of us, which is lacking a lot more sort of experience in our own domain. I'm relatively new at this point, but getting by. So we get working on this project, and initially it was like, from the project manager's perspective, he's like, hey, like, I can do a lot of the coordination here. I can kind of do a bunch of this stuff. Like, basically, you can take a bit of a back seat. This is how, like, it wasn't said exactly like this, but sort of the interpretation from how we were splitting up work and stuff was mostly like, you can take a back seat, because when it comes to actually getting the work done, that's when I'm going to be more involved with kind of looping in the engineers and stuff. So I feel like we had a pretty good plan going into this. And then what was happening is that it was really difficult to get buy-in from the other teams. So we had to collaborate across different teams in the org. But it was like literally it felt like every time we would meet and have discussions, because it was pretty complicated, it felt like we were just starting from scratch every time. So you couldn't have a 30-minute meeting because 30 minutes were spent recapping the last meeting. If you did an hour meeting, we'd probably do 45 minutes recapping and then have 15 minutes of moving forward. And it felt glacial. Like we couldn't get anything done. It was nuts. Now, during this time frame, we were making a little bit of progress. And the way that things progressed is that project manager ended up moving over to another team. But by the time they were doing that, it felt... Sorry, this guy's... I'm driving through a construction zone and I have the right of way to drive through. They have the signs at the end that are flipped to slow and stop. So I have slow, and then one of the guys wasn't paying attention in the middle and was trying to direct traffic to like pull out onto the road. And like, that's not how it works. You need to have both ends saying stop so that he can direct traffic. So almost a whoopsie on his part. So at this point in the project manager ends up moving over to another team. But fortunately, we had just gotten to the point where we were like, hey, I think we have alignment. We can move forward and build these things. Or at least our dependencies can start working on this stuff. Cool. Turns out no one actually was really aligned on things. So there was no movement by partner teams. There was no movement on our end because we were still actually lacking clarity when it came time to start implementing. And then I found myself in this situation where it was like, well, we told the partner teams, why aren't they doing it? Right? Like my project manager was working on this. Like I thought everything was good. Like, did he not sort of do the part that he was expected to? Not necessarily to blame him, but like at least to where I thought things were, like, is it not actually there? And I found myself in this situation where I was like, well, what the hell? Like, I thought that all of this was moving and it's really not where it needs to be. And this is a pretty bad, like from my perspective, looking back on it, a pretty bad spot to be in, because it was almost like we spent all of this time and I don't think that we've even taken a single step forward. And what had to happen was that I basically realized when I was doing one of my, we call them connects at Microsoft, and we do them twice a year, sort of write down our accomplishments, our setbacks, things like that. I was writing mine up, and I just remember being like, it almost felt embarrassing to say I was working on this project. Maybe that's too strong of an emotion to convey, but like it felt like I have to go write about this because I've been working on it, but like what's been delivered? Like nothing. Like we're definitely behind. So that was a moment where I said, okay, if I'm doing this reflection, there was work getting done. Like we were putting work into this, but nothing was coming out of it. And I was like, I'm not actually driving this. Like I'm not actually being accountable. I'm not following up. I'm basically wanting to trust that people that are saying they're going to get stuff done, they're just getting it done and it's happening. But I just got burned really, really bad by that not being the case. And I am not sitting here blaming the other people, because maybe they were doing the same thing and they thought other people were getting stuff done and not necessarily owning it end to end. But that's like, I can't sit here and blame them for it because I wasn't doing it either. So I had a pretty like transformative experience after that, where I was like, okay, we got to get the right stakeholders in. We got to make sure that we can get on the same page. I realized that there was another team that wasn't even, when we started engaging with them and talking, like I started talking with their manager, I realized their manager wasn't even aware of the project. Like that's the kind of gap we had. So, and we'd been working on it for like almost a year, like crazy. So I was like, okay, there's a huge communication gap we have to sort out. We need to have people start being accountable, and that's ultimately going to start with me. So this was, for me, an example of trying to get in the driver's seat and take ownership. And the way that this looked different was, instead of me having conversations with people and saying, okay, you're doing this, right? Okay, cool. And then just moving on to the next thing and never sort of like, I don't know, like following up specifically on goals and the actions that were taken. I trusted a little bit too much that it was just going to happen the way we talked about it. But the reality is, it was nothing like that. So it was much more of a passive approach to leading things, right? Like, I'm going to help. Whoa, buddy, you can't just come in this lane. He tried to merge 2 lanes at once to get around a truck, but I'm in this lane. My God. So it was much more of a passive approach where it was like, I'm going to help lead on the steps to go forward, but I wasn't being accountable, right? And it was a lot more work once I had to start stepping in and being accountable and taking ownership. So when we talk about things like taking ownership, I like thinking about being proactive. I like thinking about being accountable and being responsible for things. And that's like the reason that this becomes important is that, like, pardon my language, like, it can be a really shitty spot to be in. Because when you have people like the person that wrote this on Reddit and they're saying, oh, these dependencies, there were regressions or we were stalled on them. It's like, guess what? Like, I get that it's outside of your control, but like, guess what, man? Like, unfortunately, it doesn't, like, the world doesn't revolve around you. And I get it because you're sitting there going, but yeah, this thing, it's outside of my control. Okay, what is in your control though? You have this dependency you're waiting on, it's blocked. Okay, are you communicating that? Are you bringing visibility to that? Are you working on alternative strategies that work around that? Engineering is all about having constraints and being creative within those constraints. We have to do a ton of analysis and we have to work within constraints. So you have this constraint, which is we have this dependency that we need. Now there's a regression and it's not going to be able to get delivered. Okay, as soon as you know that, visibility. Immediate visibility, right? People need to know. It's not a sign of you failing. It's you saying, hey, look, we agreed that we need this dependency, not going to fly, and we're blocked on it. So, number one, visibility. Why is it blocked? Maybe someone on the other side that owns that visibility, depending on how that's being managed, we actually need their leadership to get involved and say, hey, look, like, you need to stop these other things you're doing and focus on getting this done. Could be a million different things, but raising visibility is super important to do early. When there's big things like this that are holding up projects, I think sometimes people have this feeling like, I kind of want to hide it. Like, it looks bad on me. I want to hide it. And I don't know in this person's case, I obviously don't know the individual and they don't comment on it, but it's a common thing I've seen where people are like, something's not going well, like, oh crap, like, don't draw attention to this. But that's the opposite. You really want to draw attention to it. And unfortunately, it's going to mean more work because now that you have attention drawn to it, you need to be able to demonstrate what you're going to do to make sure that it doesn't get screwed up. So, original plan was you have this dependency, it's now blocked. Step one, visibility, right? People need to have awareness of this. That's going to be on your side. That might mean that you have to escalate to the leadership side of the other group where the dependency is coming from. You can attack it on both fronts. Now, oh man. I see people slamming on the brakes and swerving off the road. Love that. Next, from there, what you want to do is start thinking about your alternative paths forward. Because if you had one path forward and it's not working for you, you can either accept that you're going to miss the project due date, which may very well be okay, but you'll never know that if you don't communicate it early. Someone might say, yep, we actually have some wiggle room of about 2 weeks here, or a week, whatever, or no, absolutely can't miss this because this is a dependency for some other group. Everything's going to get pushed. We can't let this slide. And ideally, you're not just giving in to letting things slide anyway, but sometimes there's some wiggle room built in. So now, okay, let's plan for the worst. This is like one of the things that I don't want to say I love to do, but apparently I do because I do it all the time. And my wife hates it. I always look at situations and I go through a bunch of different scenarios. I tell her this is just my engineering mindset. I will always analyze things and I will always try to come up with worst case scenarios. Always. And I do this because if I'm looking at the worst case scenario and I'm going, hey, the worst case scenario is not that bad, it's probably a pretty okay solution to go with. If you're looking at the worst case scenario and it has you scared shitless, like maybe it's not your risk tolerance, it's not up to par with your risk tolerance. So like, this is why I do this kind of stuff. So you want to be looking at alternative paths in a situation like this. Dependencies blocked. You have one course of action, which is how do we try to unblock it? And while that's happening, what is your backup plan? Because if the backup plan is just wait, it's probably not going to be great. Your goal is to get this delivered. What are you doing? I get that the dependency is blocked. I understand. I've been there many times. So what are you putting into play for an alternative strategy? Maybe there's something that can be done that's not the ideal thing. Maybe it's going to mean more work in the future, right? We can do this other thing for now that's not as good, but gets us most of the way. Hear about the 80-20 rule a lot. We can slide that in here. Gets us 80% of the way there. And okay, like that's not perfect, but at least we'll have something by the due date. And maybe it's going to mean more work later to pull it back out and put in the right solution, but at least we can meet the deadline. That's a possible path forward. Now, if you do the analysis on it in terms of cost and effort, is it viable? Is it worth it? Right? Like we have to, like the whole goal here is that we have to be thinking about different ways to do things and not just sitting back and being passive regarding what's happening. So I need some water, but that's kind of my thinking on this. Let me get a sip of water here, and then I'll see if there's anything else up in the old brain. I've been delaying my caffeine intake a lot, and even over the weekend. So for those of you that don't know, I have like a serious caffeine problem. I was having like for years, like over a gram to a gram and a half of caffeine a day. A cup of coffee is like 80 milligrams of caffeine. So you can imagine that's a lot of caffeine. And ended up, I don't know if it's because of it, but I can't see any other way. But I basically have narcolepsy now. And I've been working on this for almost a year at this point, I would say, trying to reduce my caffeine intake. So I'm down to around 400 milligrams a day, probably a little bit less on average, which is a big step down. It's still a lot of caffeine. And even like over the past couple of days of the weekend, and we had a long weekend here, it was like I didn't have caffeine on one of the days, like at all. Very tired. Like for me to go through a day without caffeine is rough, but I did it. Okay. The other thing I should probably talk about here is like, because this person's saying like their manager's telling them they're lacking ownership, right? It's probably a good opportunity to talk about this a little bit, but like this is direct feedback from your manager, right? So it's something that they're observing. If when you hear me talk about like alignment with your manager, right? A lot of people are focused on like, how do I get to the next level in my career? How do I get promoted? How do I know if I'm doing a good job? I always say like the best person to have a conversation with about this is not me. I would love to give you advice, but like I'm not managing you unless you're someone on my team that I'm managing right now, in which case I'm lying. But probably statistically speaking, most of you are not people I'm managing. So I can give you my perspective, but at the end of the day, the perspective that's going to matter is from the conversation you have with your own manager. Okay, so in this case, this person is getting feedback from their manager. You're lacking ownership. This is a trait that they are looking for. They want you to demonstrate this. It's an expectation that you're demonstrating this. So I would say, like, as crappy as it is to hear feedback like this, and I don't know how it was delivered to them, right? Like, it's not said in the Reddit thread, but even if it was delivered crappy, the silver lining here is like someone's telling you something that you can specifically put effort to improving on, which is great. Now, the trickier part might be that you have no idea what to do about it, right? Like, how do I go take ownership? So something that might be valuable, again, in terms of level setting expectations, is having a conversation with your manager about how this project's been playing out. I've given you some ideas in this talk so far about some things that I would like to see. I tried to be a little bit vulnerable and explain, like, I've literally been in situations where I was not taking ownership and kind of had to learn the hard way and make adjustments. But the reality is, like, if you want to keep, like, sort of moving forward in your career, you can take the general advice, like, that I'm offering. You can adapt it because, you know, I'm just one person on the internet, so adapt it for your suitability. But but ultimately, like, you need to be aligned with your manager on this stuff. So if you're like, okay, they're saying ownership, but I don't know what they're expecting here, great opportunity to go dive into that with them. Say, hey, I hear you. Okay, I need to take ownership. You're not observing that for me. Can you explain to me in more detail, like, what that looks like to you, right? Like, how, like, what does ownership in this look like in this situation? You could even go on to say, like, hey, I've been feeling like I'm blocked on these other dependencies. I'm feeling stuck and I might need support. So if you're saying I need to take ownership, like, I don't really know what that looks like. It's okay to have conversations like this. I think sometimes people feel that when they're trying to do this kind of thing, is that a Rolls Royce behind me? Oh man, we gotta let this guy pass. It looks nice, it's big. Oh yeah. Sorry, I'm distracted by this thing, it's nice. I think it's a Cullinan. Let's see. But I think people are afraid to say, like, I don't know something. Right? And there's nothing wrong with doing that. Take that as an opportunity to learn and get alignment. Let's see if this will pass us. Oh yeah, man, it's nice. I would love a Rolls Royce. Cullinan? No. If I were gonna buy one, no. I'd like a Ghost, I think. But I bet it's nice inside. Yeah, so alignment with your manager, really important for this kind of thing. So I know it's a bit of a tangent from the specific topic, but I wanted to bring it up because when I see people, and, like, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying, like, don't do this, but when I see people writing online to Reddit and asking questions like this, I realize they're just looking for more broad feedback and opinions and perspective. Nothing wrong with that. But I would say if they're not talking to their manager about this, like, it's just a missed opportunity. People just don't do this. Obviously, there are plenty of people that do, but I've done, like, mentorship programs where my mentees they'll talk to, like, they'll open up to me about stuff that they're struggling with or they have questions about, and or, like, hey, like, something's not really feeling good in the team, so we're chatting through it, and, you know, and I've seen patterns like this happen a ton. And we get to a point and I'm like, hey, so, like, you know, what's your manager said when you talked to them about this? And they're like, yeah, like, I know I haven't really brought it up with them yet. And sometimes I don't even say yet. They're just like, yeah, like, no, I haven't talked to them about this. And I find it fascinating, right? Because, and I get it, some people have managers that might be intimidating, that might have bad managers. Maybe this individual's kind of quiet and they're timid, they're nervous about bringing stuff up like this to their manager. But I find it, like, the reason I kind of chuckle at it is because it's like, this is probably the best person to go talk to about this thing. So I always try to remember people that I'm mentoring, like, please have conversations with your manager. Work on that relationship to be able to have those conversations. But that's, like I said, a bit of a tangent from this conversation. Ultimately, ownership is going to mean that you have to be proactive, and sometimes that means doing extra work that you didn't plan for. It might mean that you're stepping outside of areas where you're like, I shouldn't have to do this. This should be someone else's responsibility. It doesn't feel fair. Why aren't they doing it? But like, if it's a project that you're leading and taking ownership on, you are responsible for the results of that project. That's why ownership is not like a simple thing. It's not just like easy, you check a box and do it. Oftentimes ownership can be complicated and it can be hard. You might be very fortunate and work on projects that go very smoothly, and you don't have to worry about this. So that's great. But like, you can really showcase ownership when you're working on projects like the one that this person described, and they're saying, you know, things went south, dependencies blocked, we're screwed right now. Okay, great. Time to step up. Time to demonstrate ownership when it's difficult. I want to share another brief example because this one's actually super relevant, and this is one where I'm in the middle of it and I need to demonstrate ownership. Okay, so bear with me as I try to explain this one. I mentioned in one of the videos, maybe a couple of them, that I had to do a presentation last week, and that presentation did not go the way that I wanted it to. I feel like not that what was being presented was the wrong thing, but I feel like the messaging in that presentation was not effective. And therefore, the side effect of that is that the audience that received that message was like, well, now we can't tell if that is the right thing. I'm still convinced that things are the right things. Nothing's wrong in that sense, but the messaging did not convey that. And then the side effect of that feels like almost like a lack of credibility. Like, we kind of failed to show, and when I say we, like, again, to take ownership, like, I drove a lot of that. So, like, I am failing to demonstrate that we are working on the right things. It's not confidence instilling if you're on the other side and you're feeling confused about that. So, again, from the perspective of ownership, what I'm not doing is saying, oh, well, I had other people review that document that I had to go present. Right? And like, that includes my manager, my skip level manager, and they said it's okay. So like, not my fault. Or I collaborated with at least, one product manager on it, and they helped write some of the parts and they had input. So like, I mean, it's their fault too. Right? Like, I can't and will not do any of that, because the point is, it doesn't matter. Like, that's a project that I'm responsible for. In this case, this presentation portion. And if that's the case and I failed to deliver on part of it, I need to own that. So we have other people that are going to be participating, and we're essentially going to do another quick follow-up version of this, just mostly in like a document format, and say like, hey, look, we heard the feedback. We heard that this is not, this was not doing a good job of conveying things. And here's a different way that we're going to try and message this and communicate these thoughts. So yes, I do have other people participating on this, but at the end of the day, like, it's gotta land. And when I say land, I mean like the messaging has to land. So if they come back again and they say still no, like, our work's not done. So I have to keep following up on this until we have a message that feels very clear. And sort of the unfortunate part about this was that this was already a big presentation to put together. This is like, it seems like, in terms of like a planning perspective, this is just extra work to go do it again. But like, tough luck. Like that's, and I don't mean that like in a way where I'm being facetious about it. I mean like tough luck. Like I literally have to go do this, and I should go do this. It makes sense for me to own this so that we don't continue down this path of uncertainty from the perspective of the other stakeholders. So it sucks, right? Like when I was receiving the feedback, I was like, man, like it feels embarrassing. It feels frustrating. Like I feel like a dummy. And I know that like, you know, my manager, my skip level manager would tell me directly like, hey, like don't feel like that. But I mean, that's the response I have internally, right? I feel like, man, I don't want to drop F-bombs on YouTube. I think I've been able to say shit, and that's okay, but I don't want to drop an F-bomb. But like, I feel like I really screwed up. And not that it can't be improved upon, but in that moment, it was like, it felt very embarrassing. And I know that's not the intention of the stakeholders to make you feel that way. But I was like, hey, like there was effort put into this. It wasn't like we just coasted by and like scraped something together. It was like there was effort put into this, and the result is that it feels embarrassing, right? But I need to own it. So cool. I understand the feedback to the best of my ability right now. I hear at least where there were gaps and how that these things were conveyed. It's time to go do the extra work to go make this right now. So again, without giving all the details of it, I just wanted to give you another example of like, this is a situation where I'm going, okay, things aren't going as planned. In this person's case from Reddit, hey, dependencies blocked. In my case, it's, hey, presentation that didn't land well. Extra work's got to get done. Because the project is not done. We have to keep moving, and we're not just going to miss our deadline for it. So, time to figure it out. From the perspective of like why ownership's so important, right, is like when you become more and more senior as a software engineer, people want you on their team when you're reliable, right? If you have a track record for being reliable, you take on projects, and people know you as someone that's going to get shit done, they're like, I want that person on the team. I want that person because I know if they're on the team, they're going to work their butt off to deliver things. They're going to make sure that when we set our goals, they're going to work towards them and get them done. What they don't want is someone that is constantly in a position where it's like, oh, well, someone else, you know, it's outside of our control. And like, because at the end of the day, like, we just want to get our stuff done. We want to get through our deliverables. And if everything is always, oh, it's someone else, like, it doesn't help. And you might be right. Like, that's the hard part here. You might be right. Someone else's fault. Dependencies blocked, someone else's fault. Someone didn't communicate something. That's their fault. I get it. There can be tons of fault on other people. But when it comes to ownership, you have to own it. You need to be the one that takes accountability for it getting done. Stop beeping at me. But yeah, I think that's my thoughts on ownership. That's why I'm saying it's like, it's not, some people might have experience where they're like, hey, yeah, like I owned a project end to end and it was actually easy. Like, Nick, you're kind of blowing it out of proportion. Other people might have a similar experience to this person on Reddit where they're like, everything was outside of my control. It sucked. How can I demonstrate ownership? And probably most projects are somewhere right in the middle, right? A lot of stuff is you feel like it's under control, and you might have one or two things that you're like, oh crap, like this feels like it's outside of my control. But you'll have different experiences, right? So I think for this person that's being told they don't have ownership, if they can kind of reel this in, it might be a very good success story for them, right? So their managers telling them they're not demonstrating ownership, that doesn't mean like, oh, you're screwed now, like you might as well give up. They're basically saying you're not showing it, and we can clearly see that there's an opportunity to show it. So like, this is an opportunity to step up and work on that. This car's got to stop beeping at me. But yeah, I think that's it. I'm getting to the office here. My wallet fell in the cup holder. Get out of there. I am going to be in the office tomorrow as well, so I'll probably get... This is the third video for today that I've recorded. I'll get 4 done. I'll do another 4 tomorrow. 2, actually, because I'm not going to CrossFit tomorrow. Damn. And then as long as I get to CrossFit on Thursday, I should be able to get you folks 2 videos every day this week, except today, which is Tuesday, because I think I've only posted 1. But that's my goal. I'm trying to get minimum 1 video a day published on this channel, so a minimum of 5 for during the week. Weekends are a little different. I'm not going to beat... I've been trying to tell myself this. I'm not going to beat myself up if I don't get videos out on the weekend. I got a lot of shit to do. And going from 3 YouTube videos a week to 10 to 15 or 12 to 15 is like... That's a big step. So I'm trying to be a little bit more kind to myself if I don't hit those numbers. But I hope you found this helpful. Ownership, proactive, accountability, responsibility. And if you have questions, leave them in the comments. And if you want to send me a message at DevLeader on social media, I'm happy to try and answer. And I'll see you next time. Take care.